Welcome to another episode of Overton Windows, the podcast mini-series that examines the window of quote-unquote reasonable discourse on a given topic. I'm Tamler Sommers here with the great Robert Wright. Bob, it's good to see you. It's been a while.
It's great to be with the great Tamler Sommers, Tamler. And it has been a while. Too long.
I think I've had 2 dogs die since we last spoke and got a new dog, so...
My sympathies. We had one die not long before. Ours died in June. I mean, we shouldn't get competitive about this, but when did your dogs die?
Well, my dogs died in November and late November and mid-January.
Oh, you win by a long shot.
Both very old. One almost 13, one practically 15. Like, very sad. Just iconic dogs. Just the stature of those dogs in our lives is...
I know the feeling. We've got one left, and he's getting up there, too.
But we got a new dog, Trixie, a little puppy from the SPCA. She's awesome. Love her very much. But I keep reminding her that she doesn't have the stature of our previous dogs.
Give her time.
I will, yeah. So today's topic is actually a sequel to our first Overton Windows. And our topic then, the first topic we ever did was Israel-Palestine. The thing is, that was on July 18th of last year, so like 10 months ago, something like that. And things have obviously and quite tragically changed since then. And it's fair to say that the Overton window on this issue has changed as well. And as you pointed out off air, this is one of those rare moments, at least in my political awareness, where we're seeing an Overton window getting shaped, kind of hammered, bludgeoned, bribed, mobbed in real time. We're really seeing how much this Overton window idea can actually have quite serious consequences for the people trying to express opinions. And it's pretty eye-opening. So we have a lot to talk about today. But before we get into all of that, let's tell listeners where they can find Overton Windows.
Well, if they want to listen to the whole thing and not just the first segment that's available to all, they could do that by becoming a paid subscriber to the Nonzero Newsletter. And they would then find it on the newsletter, a post, and they could also set up a podcast feed that would bring them all the bonus content on all the podcasts. Where else might they gain access to the entire conversation, Tamler?
Wow, we're just setting each other up here. Well, you can also find it on the Very Bad Wizards Patreon. Our Patreon at the bonus tier level, which is $2 and up per main episode, which is essentially $4 a month. You can access all of our Overton windows there, as well as a ton of other bonus content, including, and by the way, I'm a very proud subscriber to the Nonzero Newsletter Substack, and there's a lot of great stuff on there.
That's so nice of you. I'm a proud future subscriber to your Patreon. I've listened to a number of your podcasts, but I've kind of been a freeloader.
Yeah, I guess so. Geez. Well, maybe I need to reassess my own subscription.
No.
Choices.
Trust me. I'm pulling out the credit card now. It's going to happen.
So the other thing you can get on a regular basis is the Ambulators, which is our detailed recaps of every episode of Deadwood, the greatest TV show of all time. So let's get into it. A lot has happened. October 7th happens. The assault on Gaza has been going on for...
7 months.
Over 7 months now. Close to 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, majority of whom are women and children. As all of this is going on, it's become kind of the center of discourse in the media, I think, on the college campuses for sure. There was a big Oscar controversy about it. Yeah, should we just get some opening thoughts on how you think the Overton window has shifted? And maybe we could even start with some of the pressures that have been put to try to constrain the Overton window through the use of money, force, and shame, and all sorts of other tactics.
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's some new vocabulary entries in the Overton window context. I mean, last time around, we talked about this. We weren't asking, is it anti-Semitic to say from the river to the sea? Is it anti-Semitic to talk about a global intifada? So there's some new language And then there's also some old language, is it anti-Semitic to be anti-Zionist? Yeah, I mean, in terms of the levers of influence, I mean, there's all the usual ones. People are having, doing podcasts and writing op-eds and saying things on social media. But you also, more than really with almost any Overton window issue, I recall, getting like Congress involved, university presidents involved, faculty as well as students involved, governors involved, billionaires involved, especially those who donate to colleges and donate to political candidates.
And massive police presence, too.
Massive police presence. In some cases, I mean, I want to talk about the UCLA case where there was a notable absence of police for,
yes,
for
right.
3 hours, very weirdly. But yeah, a real crackdown in your state at the University of Texas. Ordered by the governor, I guess. I think not even necessarily requested by the university president.
My understanding is it was requested.
Oh, was it?
By the
okay.
Yeah.
Now, has there been much on your campus at the University of Houston? I mean, just much protest activity?
There have been small protests throughout. And, University of Houston has one of the highest Palestinian student populations of any university. It's an incredibly diverse campus and very high Muslim Arab population as well. So I honestly thought there might have been more. But, the culture of the campus isn't quite like the culture of a UT or some of these other campuses for something like this. Early on, there was a bunch of protests in front of the library, and they're chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and stuff like that. And it was fine. Like, we have spaces where this can happen, and there were no tents. We did have our first arrests on this, where there was an encampment that was shut down on the basis of some rule that, as I understand it, was an actual rule, unlike these universities that pass rules overnight to make whatever is going to happen the next day illegal so that they can call in the state police. But yeah, nothing like what happened at UT, which, I'm fairly on record as being appalled by. Sadly, it's the most common reaction. It's not that much of an outlier in terms of how people have reacted, like at Columbia or at Ohio State. And as far as I know, we didn't have snipers like they did at Indiana, and I think also Ohio State, on the roof looking to take out people. That would be a little bit touchy at the University of Texas.
Yes,
Austin.
I recall. I'm old enough to actually recall a shooting from an elevated place in Austin. It was one of the first mass shootings in modern America. Yeah, I have a couple of points of contact, I guess. For starters, both of my daughters in the early going were arrested multiple times for refusing to disperse at these protests.
Like the bridge protests, stuff like that.
One was a Grand Central Station protest.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it was an interesting time because it was before the protests became so much more, you might say, Palestinian. And the early ones were kind of ceasefire now. Their characters changed in a way that I think is relevant to the way the whole debate is playing out. I mean, I know one of my daughters has, they're both out of college, but she also sat in on the Columbia protest a few days before they first called the police in. And so anyway, what I have a shortage of is people in my family who are on kind of the other side of the debate. I'm guessing you have more of that than I do.
Yeah, it sounds like your daughters are virulently anti-Semitic, but
that's the way they put it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I actually have been at odds with certain really close friends and also family members, some of the closest family members I have. At first, it got very, I don't know, touchy. We had Thanksgiving, right after, and there was a lot of worry that this could explode in a way that would make the rest of the visit, they always come visit us for Thanksgiving, unviable. And we always love, this is something that we treasure and look forward to every year. And there was a very rough night, and especially kind of an explosion one night. And then it sort of settled into, we don't talk about it that much. Same, I would say, with my close friends who are on the other side of this issue. I will say that the kind of people that disagree with me and, radically and are also very close to me are of a type, and I'm wondering how viable you think this position is. That type is, I guess you would call it the liberal Zionist, although at times it doesn't seem as liberal as that might suggest, but very much anti-Netanyahu, right? So anti-Netanyahu, anti the crazy right-wing settlers, and leaning on that to sort of justify the position that is still resistant to a ceasefire, although I don't know what the latest in all these people, because it's been a while since, but, deep into it was resistant to calls for a ceasefire, certainly resistant to cutting aid and arms shipments, and kind of banking on when this is over, Netanyahu's very unpopular government will be voted out, and then they can get back to work on a two-state solution of some kind. Yeah, I wonder how, at this point, maybe we could start with this as a substantive question, like how viable you think that position is, the kind of anti-Netanyahu, but pro-Israel, anti any kind of restrictions or withholding of support for what they're engaged in.
Yeah. First of all, I should say, I'm pretty sure that one of the people who was at your Thanksgiving dinner is the same person I had an interaction with on Twitter shortly after October 7th. And I think it's just as well I was not at your Thanksgiving dinner. That probably wouldn't have helped matters. On the whole Netanyahu issue, now, is the question partly...
Well, I'm a little shook by how much I disagree. Like, to me, it's not a no-brainer in terms of exactly what you want, but it's morally not complex that what the Israeli government is doing right now, qualifies as war crimes, might qualify as a genocide, engaged in a project of ethnic cleansing and just killing thousands and thousands of Palestinian citizens, as well as a side project, also terrorizing the West Bank Palestinians who were not a part of this, not part of Hamas. And so you can't even pretend. So to me, this is kind of a clear-cut thing of we have to stop funding them. We have to, use America's influence to make this stop. And it's been like that, for the last 6 months. But their position is, no, you can't do that. You can't expect a country that suffered something like October 7th to not respond in a violent, retaliatory way, and to try to make sure that this won't happen again, to try to eradicate Hamas, even if there's no plan for that. When you talk to them about this, they say, yeah, no, of course, we hate Netanyahu too. We blame him for this in part. I mean, he did kind of fund fucking Hamas. There's the quotes and the reports about him saying we have to keep channeling money to them so that there's no Palestinian state, but still you got to support Israel. Do you think that's a viable moral position? Because if it's not, it's like, I love these people. I love all of them. So it's like, it's weird. I've never been in this situation where I've had such a deep moral disagreement with people that I'm this close to.
Yeah, well, I guess the strongest argument I'd mount on their behalf would start with the fact that, in my view, this is no more extreme a reaction relative to the initial assault than American foreign policy after 9/11 was relative to 9/11. Because, in terms of kind of trauma levels, this is a hard comparison to make, but large numbers of Americans really didn't feel that personally threatened by 9/11.
Right.
They were nowhere near New York. I think, Israel's a much smaller country and so on. And
people know people who died, chances are.
And although 9/11 was 100% an attack on civilians, I've long said about Israel, they're no crazier than Americans. On the other hand, Americans are crazy. I mean, I wrote right after 9/11, do not let your retributive impulse govern your behavior. We did. I think it was a disaster. And I think what Israel is doing is a bad idea, even from Israel's own point of view, which I've
100%.
A lot of policies favored by so-called pro-Israel people. And when I argue with Israelis and so on about this, I tend to emphasize that. I don't think this is good for Israel. Now, it's true that they earnestly believe it is, the supporters of this. Look, you can make a case. It's not, I understand the logic. So I guess there's a lot of people they're not worse than in the world, including.
I agree with that. So fine, if you want to say that our reaction, invading Iraq and Afghanistan and staying there for as long as we did, and all the number of deaths and all the number of, of our own soldiers who died or who have trauma from that war, you want to say this isn't as bad? I mean, I don't know. Like it is in terms of like number of people killed in such a small time. But fine, you might even almost like not forgive, but understand a country overreacting to something like October 7th. What is much harder to reconcile is why we are being, again, fully complicit in it, fully supportive of it, and in fact trying to constrain debate about what people can say. And that's, to me, seems in some sense more unforgivable what the United States' role in this is, because not only do we not have the excuse that happened to us, we also have the benefit of hindsight. Now everyone realizes the Iraq War was a tragic atrocity and mistake, and bad for us, bad for the world, bad for our standing in the world. And yet we're just doing it again.
And if you ask why we're aiding and abetting something that some people are calling a genocide, and of course, whether that is anti-Semitic is a question we can get to, because Congress passed a bill that basically defines it that way, as I can explain, calling, the House has passed the bill, the Senate hasn't, but we can get to that. Just a couple of weeks ago, a bill that would basically say that colleges that let students compare anything Israel does to anything Nazi Germany did, and genocide was one thing Nazi Germany did, that those colleges could be denied federal funding. That's one thing this legislation means, and that's very Overton window relevant, and we can get to that. But, well, first of all, Americans are not especially attuned to the consequences of their policies in other countries generally. On the other hand, this is a very conspicuous consequence. Everyone knows what's going on in Gaza and that we're supplying the weapons. And there's one clear development since October 7th is growing anti-Israel sentiment in America. I mean, the public opinion polls show it, especially among young people, but not only among young people. I mean, Israel faces more like popular headwinds as a result of what's going on than they've ever faced in America in my lifetime. If you ask, well, why nonetheless are we persisting in this policy? I think it gets to some of these forces we were talking about that are now involved in a power struggle over the Overton window, right? It's various kinds of pro-Israel actors, including certainly donors to politicians. If you ask why no presidential candidate, even including RFK, is opposed to continuing to supply the weapons, on the Republican side, it has a lot to do with the Christian Zionist part of the Israel lobby, but also some pro-Israel donors. There have been people who have said all along, this is a very strong lobby if you construe it broadly as going beyond AIPAC, which is literally a lobby, and including the various pro-Israel donors, groups, and enforcers of speech code, right? That I would say, some people would say, not all, the Anti-Defamation League, I would say that's one thing they do.
Yeah.
They, for a long time, I don't know what the position is now, said that if you call Israel an apartheid state, you are anti-Semitic and things like that. So, I had Steve Walt, who was co-author of the book, The Israel Lobby, on a few months ago. It was right after the Harvard and Penn presidents were fired, after pro-Israel donors kind of threatened that there would be consequences if something didn't change. And I said, so this is a victory for the Israel lobby, right? And he said, yeah, serious victory.
It's undeniable at this point, right? I mean, you could say that, like, if somebody said this Israel lobby isn't swaying at least political discourse, the politicians and their views and their votes and the bills they're trying to pass, that the Israel lobby isn't influencing that, that's just false. You can say it's anti-Semitic to suggest that, but I think one of the ways that the Overton window has changed is I don't know if that's taken seriously anymore to try to question whether people like John Fetterman and Richie Torres, but they're just the most vocal, obnoxious version of the politician that is getting over $1 million from AIPAC or pro-Israel organizations that aren't even trying to hide the fact that this isn't about anti-Semitism. This is about Israel and our backing of Israel.
Yeah, no, I mean, part of the speech code that has traditionally been enforced with some success is you're not supposed to depict the Israel lobby as powerful. Remember Ilhan Omar, when she said it's all about the Benjamins, referring to why particular people in Congress had voted, one way or another on something or other. She was referring to AIPAC, got into a lot of trouble. I think she probably more or less apologized. Now, the levers of influence coming from the pro-Israel side, and look, there are other levers of influence. They're not alone. There is another side of the fight, but...
The Nonzero Substack influence.
You think that's it?
No, I think there's probably more.
No, I agree that for the time being, the other side seems outmatched in a lot of realms. But anyway, on the pro-Israel side, there are people sticking with this argument that if you emphasize too much the power of the Israel lobby, you're anti-Semitic. I had Eli Lake on my podcast recently, strongly pro-Israel, it's safe to say, and he was pushing back on that, saying, yeah, no, what Ilhan Omar said that's anti-Semitic.
But that's crazy. But we're all in our bubbles. We all have our media shaped in certain ways, but I don't see how you could possibly deny.
Look, the whole spectacle of these college presidents being dragged before Congress, and all of this performative stuff from people in Congress, including the woman who was pronouncing intifada. It sounds like a new kind of Tex-Mex food. It's like, and she kept saying, she doesn't know shit about this stuff, but she felt compelled to perform. And we should reflect on what a major power play this was, I think. Okay.
Yeah.
They initially, was it 3 or 4? I guess it was MIT, Harvard, Penn.
Claudine Gay at Harvard, former president of Harvard. And then also, the Penn one also fell on the sword. Yeah.
And this was after, in both of those cases, donors, Bill Ackman in the case of Harvard, some other pro-Israel guy in the case of Penn, basically said, you're playing with fire if you want us to continue to support you. Okay, so both presidents stepped down. And I personally think that thereafter, the willingness of presidents to call in the police pronto to deal with encampments has something to do with them having seen what happened to those other presidents. And I mean, to drive the point home, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, is that his name? He came to Columbia and said, we're thinking seriously about cutting funding for colleges. So very overt threat. And I think part of the response of the presidents is a reflection of that. So I agree. Look, the levers of influence have been exercised very openly, but we're all in our bubbles. As we've said before, that complicates the whole idea of a single Overton window, right? It's like coming out of this, I can guarantee you that there will be people who say from the river to the sea is fine. And there will be people who say it's anti-Semitic. And there was a time in American kind of cultural and social history where there definitely was more unity of perspective, for better or worse.
And I think the reason why the levers of influence have been pressed, just like the masks have come off of how this normally works, is because it's such an emergency from, I think, their perspective. They see that in contemporary discourse, this has something to do with social media. This has something to do with the democratization, for better or for worse, of how people get their news. They don't get any more like these networks and the Times fully shaping the Overton window on this issue. That era is over. And you have these live videos of what's going on in Gaza. And so they see that this is the time. If you're ever going to call in, you've given these people tons of money. Now's the time to prove that you've earned it. This is the time because, like you said, a lot of people in the U.S. are turning against Israel just because they're learning, wait, what's been going on? This has gotten a lot of people just to do a little crash course in what's been going on in Israel for the last 50 years. And, if you didn't go to Hebrew school like I did and you're not already leaning one way for whatever reason, that doesn't seem, from a more non-biased perspective, this doesn't seem like something we should be giving this much unconditional and almost, zealous support to. And so I think, around the world, that's happened probably previous to this and even more. It's been by an order of magnitude more after the war started. And then I think in America too. And you see that in the polls. You see that in, the polls among Democrats, and even Democratic Jews are against what Israel is doing and calling for a ceasefire. And still the Democrats and Biden they barely budge an inch. We could talk about the kind of perhaps bogus threat to withhold certain kinds of weapons that Biden made. It is the tiniest little breadcrumb that he's throwing to the majority of his own party, and in some cases, the vast majority of his own party that he's depending on to elect him. It's just become hard to believe that money and influence and lobbying, which always has on not just this issue, but so many different issues, a huge effect on policy, that's not having a big effect in this case, because otherwise it just doesn't make sense. It really doesn't.
Yeah, and on the Okay, so that was the opening segment of our conversation, which goes on for nearly another hour. To listen to the whole thing, you can either become a paid subscriber to my Nonzero Newsletter /podcast, which is on the Substack platform, or become a patron of Tamler's Very Bad Wizards podcast, which he co-hosts with David Pizarro and which is on the Patreon platform. Either way, you'll get lots of other bonus content, and either way, you'll be supporting an endeavor that Tamler and I agree is worth supporting. But whether or not you take that plunge, we thank you for listening this far, and we encourage you to stay alert for the next episode of Overton Windows.